What's up, YouTube? Alright, this is part 4 in the Brute to Forge Integral Chef Knife video. Alright, there she is. That's the preview you're getting. I'll show an in-depth pan over kind of view of the finished product. In this video, I will be going, this is the last video in the series. I will show the finished product at the end of the video. But during the video, I will be demonstrating how to fit up the handle, get it nice, clean, no gap fit up, and how to sculpt and sand the handle to finish. Stay tuned. Alright, so in order to get things real squared up, you have to square a stop up to your workspace. So I'm using this speed square in a 1, 2, 3 block as basically my guide to square up the end of the block. I had already checked to make sure that the platen or the work rest 90 degrees to the disc grinder, and you can see here I'm using this machinist square. This is precision 90 degrees, and you can see there's no light shining through that. And then I go ahead and square the other end, so that way when I'm drilling my holes, if I set it flat and square, it's going to be dead straight. So I just scribed a center line, and then I took the calipers and measured the width of my tang and used the edge of the calipers to scribe the boundaries, and then I do the same on my block of wood. I end up adjusting this later because of the way that the handle was set, and I wanted to make sure that I had enough of the block of wood on both sides of the handle. And then I mark it with this black Sharpie so that way I can see my lines when I'm drilling my holes. This just helps you drill. And then I used, I think this was a 1/4 inch drill bit. I know it's hard to see there. To drill my holes. My tang was thicker than a 1/4 inch. I started by using just my hand, and that didn't work out, so I chucked it up in this little drill press vise and drilled all the holes that way. And then you can use the same vise for the wood and actually angle it to fit your tang because you marked the side of the block already. And that'll help you really grind it down. I'll show you in a second. But first you fit up the spacer so that way you can line your tang up. And you can see I'm using this, that same carbide bit I used earlier for knocking in the shoulders on the tang, and I'm just trying to give it enough relief for that to go up the majority of the way. And you also want to kind of round the corners where it meets up with your tang, because your tang is rounded and it's not square at the junction bolster in your tang. And if you leave that hard 90, it's never going to sit flat, so you kind of have to cut and release all the way around and then shove it up. And what I just did here was I transferred some Sharpie from the tang to the inside of the material I'm trying to cut. I also marked my top front, so I know how the orientation of the spacer every single time I take it off and put it back on. And then you just kind of have to keep doing that with the Sharpie until it sits flat. what I just showed you there was some jeweler's rasps, but they were actual wood rasps, so they're a lot more coarse and they work a lot better in this situation. Okay, so you can see what I'm lining up the block and tracing my tang, and this is really important because you need to know where to drill your pinhole. So if you don't mark your block up while it's square, your pinhole can be off. And this is the basic guide, and you can see I'm adjusting my lines because of how my tang kicks in one direction. So now I'm going to go to the drill vise and drill that with my new guidelines that follow the tang orientation. First thing I did at the drill press was angle my block so that the drill will follow the lines of my tang, because my tang does not go on the block straight, so if I drilled straight down I would be getting lopsided holes that fit my tang. You want to meet everything up to where your tang actually ends up being straight on the block. That's very important, that the junction at the top of your block meets the junction at the bottom of your spacer perfectly flat, or you'll have these gaps that epoxy is going to fill and it's not going to look very good. This tool I'm using is a handle broach, and then I'm also using rasp files. I'll put a link down to both of those in the description. The broach helps a lot scrape out straight, even lines on the like the vertical plane with the blade, and then the rasps help clear out the stuff on the sides. The rasps are really coarse. I mean, they're like actual wood rasps, but they are like jeweler's files, so they make it really easy to remove material in these smaller areas on wood and stuff like that. And then it also leaves a course inside so that your epoxy has something to attach to. I don't like filing stuff clean inside the tang because I want that epoxy to have something to bond with. Alright, so right here I'm inserting a brass plug into the 1/4-inch hole into the tang. This is going to be the soft material that I'm going to drill through once I drill the hole, and the handle material. This allows me to not have to drill and harden material with still getting that same fit up that you get while drilling through steel. Alright, so I'm using wax paper to make the mess easier to clean up. And I'm using 5-minute epoxy with black dye on it. It's epoxy dye. The reason I'm using 5-minute epoxy instead of 24-hour epoxy is because the epoxy is just to fill the void in the handle. I have a pin that's creating a mechanical lock. So the epoxy is just that material that's going to fill the void once you insert the tang and stop it from having any movement or vibrations or anything like that. It's not actually holding anything together. That's what the pin is for. Quick clamp or ratcheting clamp. It's a very large clamp. It's about 30-inch, I think, opening, and then I take a secondary clamp with a file guide on the other side, and the secondary clamp I have has a slot cut in it so it can fit around the blade. The reason I use 2 clamps is so that way you get even down pressure, so it's not canting the blade in any direction, creating a small gap. And then after it's all clamped, the glue is cured, or the epoxy is cured, I take my height gauge, I set it right at the edge of my bevel, and then I scribe lines on the handle material to give me a relative center. You can see I flip it and do 4 scribe lines. This gives me the relative center, which is still really, really close. You can see there's a small gapping in between, but that still helps me find the center and get everything more even. And you can see I'm getting it a little bit closer, and then I'm also scribing outer boundary lines to grind the excess material off. Coming off the grinder, I decided to use some thin CA glue and coat the whole handle with it. This will help with tear out from the wood. Even stabilized wood will tear out pretty bad. And I'm using a set of very small rasps. They're like jeweler's files, but they're actual wood rasps. I'll try to find a link and post it down below. These are very helpful when shaping a handle. So I'm using a mill bastard file and these rasps to really contour and work in my facets while removing material in a very quick way. Okay, so when hand sanding, I started at 220, I go 320, 500, and 800. Right now I'm using even pressure on the back with the sandpaper and doing pull strokes to get all the grains even up. And then you just saw me use some Starbond CA glue, and I use that especially when I'm working with fibrous materials like micarta and stuff like that. The fibers in it want to pop out as you're sanding it, but if you use that super glue, it seems to keep everything tight together so it sands more evenly. And it also helps with wood as well, especially some more natural woods. Any fibrous material, it kind of stabilizes the surface of that material so that way you can hand sand it. You can see I was doing just the paper on the spine where it's rounded, and then I moved to using a sanding stick. So this is just a piece of micarta with a leather backer, and then I chamfered the front end so that way you have a nice thin area to get into tight spots. And right here I'm CA gluing the entire handle at 320, and I'll go over and hand sand all of that. This helps get a more even finish once you're getting into the higher grits and everything seems to be more of a polishing than actually removing material. So putting the CA glue kind of lays an even foundation, and you just knock off the high areas, and it's going to fill in any minor cracks or voids or flaws in the wood, so that way you get a more even finish throughout. I'm just spraying it with a little denatured alcohol to clean it up and get all of the dust off before I flip it up and work on the butt of the knife. So it's kind of the same progression at the butt. I file it, I knock in some 45s, give it some nice faceting, and so that it's not harsh in the hand. You can see there was some super glue to start off with, so I didn't have to super glue it after this point. And the vise I'm using is the Trojan Horse Knife Maker's vise, and I can't recommend this thing enough. You can hand sand integrals on it, like you can do what I'm doing here and hand sand the butt of the handle, and it's really well made, really precision put together. All the parts and stuff like that are all made by them. And they're also knife makers, so they really know how to make a good vise for a knife maker. I'll put a link down and below to this vise. So the reason I have the tape on there is because I polished up the handle pretty nicely already, and you want to do that before you start peening anyway, because the pen gets in the way from the hand sanding and stuff like that. I think I had a little excess pen material, so I do go back and forth from the grinder, removing a tiny bit, peening it again, removing a tiny bit, peening it again. I basically want it flush with the tape, and then I'll take it to the buffer later and round all the corners from the buffer, and you can see it's pretty polished from just the hammer and stuff. So you take it to the buffer. That's just some black compound and that because I want it to be aggressive. I want it to take metal away from the stainless pen and round the corners off. And you can see it gives it a pretty nice polish as well. And then I go ahead and take the tape off and hit it with the other buffing wheel that has no compound on it, just to clean it up. Alright YouTube, that is going to be the end of this video. I unfortunately could not get any glam shots before the knife sold, so I'm just going to end the video there. You can see it was pretty much finished at the end. After I peened the pen and polished it on the buffer, I really only, add more boil linseed oil to the handle and sharpen the knife up. I'm going to do a sharpening video later on, so I didn't need to include any of that stuff in this video. I've got some future videos coming out. Anyway, check out these couple of videos here and the earlier process of this knife. Hit that bell notification button, like, subscribe, comment, do all of that stuff. I really appreciate it. I appreciate you guys checking this video out. I know it was a long one, but I still really appreciate it. Hope you guys found this very helpful in your knife making processes. If you have any questions about any of the tools or any of the techniques I used, shoot me a message or a comment below. Anyway, thank you guys. See you in the next one.